but we will speak double the normal speaking speed, so I hope you don't mind. No, I was just kidding. Anyway, welcome to this side event dealing with the importance of the outcome of the very recent 11th May, actually, Arctic Council Ministerial that took place in Fairbanks, Alaska, and its significance for the coming 2018 facilitative dialogue. My name is Svante Bodin. I am working with the organization ICCI, International Cryosphere Climate Initiative, an international NGO formed actually right after the Copenhagen conference. I will both moderate this side event and give a short presentation myself at the end of the side event before we can go into a session of questions and answers. I will soon present the speakers here, but first I would remind you of the reasons why we are here and how that links with the Arctic. Right now here in Bonn, countries have come together to talk about the next steps for the Paris Agreement, which is how to implement the next period of commitments or nationally determined contributions up to 2030. The next step is called Facilitative Dialogue. It's the 2018 stock-taking exercise that we are looking forward to. If we look at two main things, the track of climate change at this time, especially in places like the Arctic that are changing the fastest, and our overall emission pathway, or the amount with which actions taken by countries so far set us on track to meet the goal of 2 degrees globally, which of course means 5 degrees in the Arctic. The SWEPA 2 report just released, and that Dr. Lars-Otto Reiersen will present shortly, is extremely important because countries taking part in the 2018 stock-taking next year will only have the SWEPA report to rely on to track changes in the Arctic region. The IPCC is planning a special report on oceans and cryosphere, but this will unfortunately not come out until after the stock-taking exercise. But anyway, that will be important for the time period after the first stock-taking, so we'll hear about that as well. The other IPCC special report that will be important is the one focused on 1.5 degrees, what the impact of 1.5 degrees will be versus 2 degrees, as well as how we can get there. This report will come out in time for the end of the 2018 stock-taking exercise. The 1.5 degree special report is key because in the Arctic, 1.5 degrees really will make a difference. Projections tell us that 1.5 degrees will preserve some summer sea ice, 2 degrees will not. 1.5 degrees preserves more permafrost, 2 degrees allow 30 to 50% to disappear and release huge carbon storage. Perhaps most important, 1.5 degrees will preserve the Greenland ice sheet. The consensus temperature now at which Greenland is largely preserved is 1.6 degrees. So 1.5 degrees has a good chance of stopping or slowing the disintegration of Greenland. But if we reach 2 degrees and stay there for any length of time, we lose Greenland. That is the stark message that we get nowadays. If we stay at 2 degrees for more than a few centuries, even going down to 1.5 degrees or lower, still won't stop Greenland from melting. The whole process has become irreversible. Right now, it appears possible that we may reach 1.5 degrees already by 2020. We had 1.1 last year. This makes the 2018 stock-taking exercise so important. If we do not bend the curve during these two first Paris commitment periods by 2020 or by 2025, 2030, then changing these dynamics back on track might not be possible. In fact, carbon dioxide emissions must peak at the latest 2020. In addition, the near-term temperature increase is decisive for the behavior of the Earth's cryosphere. Not only the Arctic is at stake, but also mountain glaciers globally and the whole of Antarctica. If we exceed these thresholds, we are committing ourselves to a world where many meters of sea level rise, enough to lose not only much of Florida, but also New York and other major cities become inevitable. This is the backdrop for today's side event. So first to speak is Lars-Otto Reiersen, but we will also have a chance to listen to Dr. Elvira Polochanska, Director of Science of the IPCC Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit, who will update us on the IPCC Special Report on Ocean and Cryosphere. We also have the pleasure of having with us the Chief Negotiator of Finland, Mrs. Outi Honkatukia. Finland has just taken over the gavel of the Arctic Council and Mrs. Honkatukia will present the Finnish chairmanship program as well as other initiatives concerning climate leadership. I will myself come back to the outcome of the SWEPA 2 report in perspective of the national or the NDC's commitments and demonstrate the risk to the cryosphere with exceeding 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees and passing important thresholds, and the implications for the 2018 facilitative dialogue. By that, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Reiersen, Executive Secretary of AMAP, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, since many years back, since in the beginning actually. The Arctic Council celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, and I think that is the same with you, Lars-Otto, then. It's also your 20th anniversary with the AMAP, I guess. He wants to respond to that right away.
Yeah. A little bit more.
Please, you have the word.
Thank you.
The floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today and to bring to you the results we presented to the Arctic Council Ministerial meeting last week in Fairbanks, and also the recommendations and the declaration text, how the ministers reacted on this. AMAP is the working group under the Arctic Council responsible to do assessment of the climate change and pollution in the Arctic and to provide recommendations for actions, policy relevant actions based on science. And that's what we have done here. The temperature in the Arctic has over the last decades increased more than the double of the globe. That's well known all over, the atmospheric temperature. The decrease in the summer ice is a headline news nearly every year or several times during the year from the normal, and we see there's a clear decrease here. But what is more alarming, that is the volume of the ice, that the thickness of the ice has been reduced. And you see the latest figures now in March 2017 is the lowest ever recorded in the Arctic. And I can show an animation here showing that back in the 80s, the Arctic was full of multi-year ice, 5, 6, 7 meter thick. That's a red color. And when you look into what we have now since 2010 and up to date, the main part of the Arctic is 1 to 2 years ice, and that's 1.5 meter, 2 meter thick ice that you have dominating in the Arctic. So it's easy to break up again if you get stormy weather, as we had some years ago when we had the record low. What is uncommunicated both by AMAP and others over the years, that is the increase in the heat of the ocean. The heat is stored in the ocean, not in the atmosphere. And what you see here is the red color coming out of Alaska, Point Barrow, you see. This is in September. Increase 6 to 8 degrees warmer water than normal. And then the other thing you see is Mackenzie, the other red coming out here. Maybe this function, yeah, here. Here you see Mackenzie. And you have the same in the Russian rivers, Ob, Yenisei. They're bringing out heat into the Arctic. And that is one of the reasons why this area is not freezing the Beaufort Sea as normal in October, November, December. Because all of the heat in the ocean has to evaporate before the ice can be created. And that is influencing the temperature in the Arctic. And this is from the last 2 years. The temperature over the central Arctic in the October, November, December is 6 degrees over the normal that has been recorded in this area. And this is a picture from a satellite last September over the North Pole. And as you can see, there's not too much fixed ice. It's crushed ice. And this is not a new phenomenon, but it's much more than we ever have seen. And this is what we will see into the future because of the thin ice in the area. It's not only ice that is affected by the climate change. It is also the permafrost that is thawing, and this is from the dead horse. It's an observation in Alaska. And we can see a clear increase from the temperature in the late 80s until 2012, increasing 3 to 4 degrees in this area, which is quite a lot. In many other areas, we can see all around the Arctic is more than half a degree and up to 4 degrees increase. And this is triggering a release of carbon, and more as the time goes and as the temperature goes. The snow cover is reducing. It's coming later in the autumn and disappearing earlier in the spring. And we have a record here of 3 to 4 days less over decades over the last observations period, meaning that the reflection of the sun is reduced in the spring and in the autumn. Then we have this one from Greenland. If it's functioning, yes. What we haven't seen is this increase in calving of the ice. Yeah. The calving, this is from the Ilulissat. It's a very beautiful area, and this is one of the biggest glaciers that are calving into the ocean. It has increased also over the last decades, and the reason for that is partly the increase in in temperature, but also that the temperature of the ocean has increased. So that is a correlation here why the Greenland is accelerating on the runoff to the sea. So what we see now as over the situation is today, the thermal expansion is responsible for 1/3 of the sea level rise. The Greenland and the Canadian and the US and Russian is another 1/3, and then there are other Antarctic and terrestrial storages is the third. What we see here is that if we continue as we do today, the Greenland will be the major contributor to the sea level rise in the next decades, and it will be the total input from the Arctic will be 50% of the sea level rise by 2100. So what we see now in the near 20-30 years is that the greenhouse gases will stress the climate system in the Arctic, the ecosystem, the society changes, not only in the Arctic, but far beyond. This figure is one of the key things we have. This is made by Jim Overland's group in Seattle. So what you see here on this area, this is the red curve is the business as usual. The blue is the RCP 4.5, or maybe more or less like the Paris Agreement. And as you can see here, we are passing 2 degrees increase in temperature by 2040. Coming up to 2100, you are 2.5 degrees, but if you don't do anything, you're up to 5. If you then look to the annual mean in the Arctic, meaning from 60 degrees north to pole, you have an increase following the RCP to 5 degrees by 2100. And if you don't do anything, you're up to 10 degrees. If you then look into what is happening in the wintertime, meaning November to March, you have an even higher increase. The Paris Agreement will give 7 degrees increase in that part of the year, 6 months, and up to 13 degrees if you don't do anything. So even with Paris Agreement, you see there come a hell of water out of the Arctic. The snow will melt, the permafrost will thawing, and the ice runoff from Greenland, and the glaciers glaciers in Siberia will disappear by mid-period here. And the same goes for many of the Canadian and the Alaskans. So this is a dramatic picture coming out here and shows how urgent it is to get into actions on a global scale. And this is not only affecting what I was mentioning about, but you can see here the warming of the ocean. We have an effect on the ocean acidification. Arctic is going very fast on ocean acidification because there's such a lot of fresh water coming out, and that has a low buffering capacity of the CO2. It will change the ecosystem on plankton, on fishes in the area. The sea ice will disappear, the melting of the glacier. So this should have been an animation, but it's still, so I'm sorry for that. So the atmosphere is going crazy. That is the phrase from the lead authors here. In the good old days, back in the 80s, the cold air was coming down from the Arctic as a dome over Northern Europe, Asia, North America. What you have today is a much more breakup in differences through the area due to the evaporation of the heat from the oceans. And this is affecting the jet streams. While we have the jet streams coming far down to Florida, Texas, and down to Spain in part of the year. And we get the warm air coming north also over Greenland, as we've shown on the increase in temperature in the previous picture. And all of this, we made a new assessment in addition to the climate assessment. We looked in what are the adaptation challenges for the Arctic. Because it's not only the climate change that are stressing the Arctic. We have ocean acidification, we have pollution, we have an increased interest from industry to go in doing mining, shipping, and oil and gas drilling. So this is a first assessment where we try to prepare the governments and the business to start preparing for adaptation to the new situation in the Arctic. So the key findings from SWEPA, the record high Arctic temperature in the last decades, confirm the trends, and in some cases we see accelerations. The cryospheric hydrological changing continues. By mid and late 2100, the Arctic will be very different from the Arctic we have today. Arctic contributions to the global sea level rise is better quantified. We have looked into the minimum sea level rise. That was what we were stressing, and we saw that if you're following the Paris Agreement, you will have 0.5 meter increase by 2100. If you don't do Paris but let it go as business as usual, you have at least 75 centimeter. And as the lead authors say in a video I had hoped to show here, in that estimate, we haven't used the new information we have of what we have learned during SWEPA assessment. They have to be included in the next assessment of the sea level rise. So that this we have shown here is really a minimum in sea level rise. And as you may know, then when Greenland is melting, Greenland is not that heavy as before, so Greenland will come up. They will not have a sea level rise. They will have the opposite. Mitigation can stabilize part of the Arctic, the cryosphere towards the end of 21st century, and dampen the speed. It's very urgently that they have started mitigation all over the world. So the implications here are for energy, hydrology, carbon balances. These are interacted. We need a better understanding on the atmospheric ocean interactions and conductivities. Arctic impact on mid-latitudes. Weather is not a question of if, but it is already, and it's how it disturbs them. And of course, we have uncertainties we have to reduce. More precise quantitative predictions are needed. The Arctic Council Declaration text says nothing. They are noting that with concern the Arctic warming at more than twice of the rate of the global average. They're noting the entry into force of the Paris Agreement and reiterate the need for global actions to reduce both the long-lived greenhouse gases and the short-lived climate forces. This paragraph was questioned until the last day of the discussions in Fairbanks before all 8 Arctic countries agreed on that part. So they note the concern, the widespread impact of climate change on the Arctic, and they call for the Arctic Council to undertake additional analysis. The assessment reports on the IPCC continued collaboration, and we welcome an updated assessment of SWEPA, and we need to adopt its recommendations. So the AMAP working group's recommendations, as you find in the summary, and which was approved, and I put them on the floor over there, but I see they are gone, and that's good. An early and ambitious and full implementation of the Paris Agreement. Magnitude of changes is uncertain, but the direction is not uncertain. Monitor and assess Arctic change and its implication is important, and to prioritize research to enhance certainties in predictions of changes and their consequences. And then we need to inform and educate and start to adapt. So this curve is very important, and I stop here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lars-Otto. That was an overwhelming amount of new information, but extremely exciting. I think we have time for a couple of direct questions from the audience this time. Anyone who has something specific? We will come back and allow more questions and answers from all the speakers. Anyone who would like to have a question right now? Yes, please. We have this box, I understand. I don't... it's supposed to be able to be thrown, but I think I take a little easy. I'm a bad pitcher, you know. So I managed. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, hi. My name is Ellie Waters. I work with the United Nations University, and mostly I do research on the human impact of climate change. First of all, thank you very much for this very dense and informative technical overview of the impact of climate change in the Arctic. I'm wondering, I've done a little bit of research before on the Arctic climate impact assessments in the past, and there was some inclusion of indigenous perspectives and indigenous knowledge, and I'm wondering if that was also included in this assessment.
Yeah, the indigenous knowledge are included, but they are mainly into the report I put on here that are called Adaptation to a Changing Arctic. Mm-hmm. That's where we brought in the indigenous people to see how they can start to adapt to the new situation. They always adapt, of course. There's nothing new for the indigenous people. Mm-hmm. But that's where you find that included much more than in this more basic science part.
Okay. And I guess a follow-up question would be with the Arctic Council Declaration, was there also any recommendations or consideration of indigenous rights and that type of approach?
I have the declaration text. You can read what they write about the acknowledgement. So that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But they do that.
They do, for sure.
I read it.
For sure they do it, yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, yes, we can take one more question, and you have the box right behind you.
I was just wondering, like, I find that with these papers, a lot of the recommendations are always like, oh, we need better data, we need less uncertainty, but don't you think that we should have more recommendations about what strategies we can start to take right now to prevent these changes from happening? Yeah,
you could ask for that. It's but that has not been our task to do that. Our task was to analyze the situation, and based on the analysis we recommend that we need action. We need action, and that's why we also try to do the adaptation to a changing Arctic to see what is more detailed actions you need in the Arctic. Based on the combined effects, as I've stressed, that it's not only climate change ongoing. For some of the area, the indigenous people and the local people, they didn't see the climate change as the major threat. they saw this change in the socioeconomic situation as the main threat for the near term. So that you have the perspective here. What is the short-term threat and what is the long-term threat for our small village to survive? So that is something we need to discuss when you see a more integrated analysis here. And you will get different answers in the different areas of the Arctic and on the globe.
Okay, thank you very much, Lars-Otto. There will be more chances to ask questions to the speaker. But right now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Elvira Polochanska. And she will speak on the IPCC special report on oceans and cryosphere update and looking ahead. Maybe a little more about what IPCC is doing for the future as well. And she is the Director of Science of the IPCC Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit in Bremen. So please, Elvira, you have the floor.
Thank you. So before I start, I'd just also like to acknowledge the co-chairs of Working Group 2, who are Hans Portner, also based in Germany, and Deborah Roberts from South Africa. So before I speak to you about the special report on oceans and cryosphere in a changing climate, I'd just like to spend some time going through an IPCC report cycle for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So we start off with proposals from governments for the special reports for areas, questions that are particularly policy relevant. And then there's a scoping process happens. So invited experts nominated by governments get together to define the outline for the report that's agreed at an IPCC plenary, and then authors are selected. So you'll see me putting up some of the key dates through my talk. And those author teams will produce a series of drafts. In each of those drafts undergoes a certain review process. So the first order draft and the second order draft go out to review to the wider science community. So this is an opportunity for scientists all around the world to review and to have their say on the drafts. The second order and final draft undergo government review, and then the final report is agreed and accepted at an IPCC plenary. So just looking back very quickly, the fifth assessment report cycle produced these products. So there were 3 working group main assessment reports. Working group 1, the physical science basis. Working group 2, impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And working group 3, mitigation of climate change. There's also a synthesis report, which draws on elements from the 3 working group reports. And there can be a number of special reports. So in AR5, there were 2 special reports on managing the risks of extreme events and renewable energy sources and climate change mitigation. In AR6, we're very much operating in a very different policy environment. There's been a number of global agreements and goals that have developed over the last couple of years, including the Sustainable Development Goals, the Addis Ababa Agenda on Action, the Sendai Framework to address disaster risk reduction, the Paris Agreement to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change, and the New Urban Agenda. And the products of the AR6 assessment cycle are going to have to tune with these new, with this changing policy environment. We're at the point where we've actually scoped the outline for the main assessment report. This was done in Ethiopia a couple of weeks ago. 168 experts from the 3 working groups gathered together. And this is a proposed outline. The reason why I'm showing you this proposed outline now, this hasn't been agreed yet. That will happen much later this year, but is because there'll be overlap. There'll be complementarities with the special reports. So the Working Group 2 outline at present has 18 chapters divided into 3 themes. So the first theme considers risk, adaptation, and sustainability for systems, so that's ecosystems and sectors impacted by climate change. The second theme looks at regions. So this looks at the geopolitical regions, including small islands. The third theme is an overview of sustainable development pathways, integrating adaptation mitigation. And there's 3 chapters in this theme. assessing key risks, decision-making options for managing risks, and climate resilient development pathways and transformation. The change in the policy agenda means that the sixth assessment report is going to be very much more focused on solutions. We also have a number of cross-chapter boxes that have been proposed, and these are opportunities to update some of the information that will be in special reports. So of particular relevance here are the cross-chapter boxes on Antarctica, the Arctic and the mountains, and these in themselves are sort of mini assessment reports. So in the sixth assessment cycle, as well as the main working group products, we have 3 special reports that are underway. Global warming of 1.5 degrees, climate change and land, an ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. And the dates up there are the dates when these reports are due to be agreed and released. So what is a special report? So special reports are designed to address policy relevant issues, and they may require input from more than one working group. So it's the opportunity to work across working groups as well as across disciplines within working groups. They address issues that merit explicit consideration, and that may not be addressed in detail in the main assessment report framework. And the outlines for the special reports builds on scientific questions that have emerged during government proposals. So looking at the oceans and cryosphere in a changing climate, IPCC invited proposals for special reports in July 2015. 31 were submitted, and of these, 7 focused on aspects of ocean and cryosphere. So they focused on issues such as those that we've just heard about. So changes in glacier mass, for example, in sea level rise, implications for communities downstream from mountain cryospheres. And the IPCC panel agreed that all of these proposals and these questions were important, and therefore that it was agreed that a special report on climate change, oceans and cryosphere would be produced to guide adaptation activities and decision making. And this special report is going to be developed under joint scientific leadership of Working Group 1 and Working Group 2. So this is an opportunity to bring the climate scientists and the oceanographers together with other disciplines, so working together with people who work on ecosystems all the way up to social systems. The outline was scoped back in December 2016 by 62 invited experts, and the outline was adopted in April 2017, last month. So the outline of the special report, there will be 6 main chapters, which I've listed up here. So as you can see, it considers cryosphere in high mountain regions, cryosphere in polar regions, implications for sea level rises, implications for dependent communities, and also some of these extremes, abrupt changes, tipping points, irreversible impacts. So the process is underway. We're just closing, I think tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the nominations for authors will close. And I've put up here that the first expert review, so this is where the science community can really come in and comment on the special report, that will open on the 4th of May 2018. And I've also put the website for the special report there as well. Just looking into 2 of the chapters in more detail. So one of them is focusing on high mountain areas. And for each of those chapter headings, we have the indicative content. So the indicative content for this chapter includes observed and projected changes in glaciers, in permafrost, in snow, feedbacks from those changes to regional and global climate, impacts on communities and livelihoods and cultures, impacts on water resources for downstream communities, implications for energy and water governments, and also implications for sea level rise. For the polar regions, again, we have a similar set of indicative content. This will include climate feedbacks and teleconnections, observed and projected changes in ice sheets, ice shelves, and glaciers, for example, as well as snow, freshwater ice, and permafrost. The impacts of a changing polar oceans for acidification, for carbon uptake and release, for fisheries, for adaptation options. So where are the benefits as well as where are the challenges, and where are the limits to adaptation? And the final section will hopefully concentrate on responses to enhance resilience. The timelines for the special report. So I said we're just right at the start of this process. So over the next month, we'll be undertaking selection of the authors from nominated experts, paying particular attention to issues such as regional balance, gender balance, as well as the overriding need of expertise. There are two review periods that might be particularly relevant for the scientific community. The review of the first order draft, which opens in May 2018, and the second order draft in November 2018. And hopefully the approval for this special report will be in September 2019. So what does IPCC assess in these special reports? In fact, so there's two categories of literature: the peer-reviewed scientific literature. So these are the scientific journals that form the basis of the report, but there's also opportunity to bring in non-published or non-peer-reviewed literature. So to bring in the grey literature, providing it adheres to the IPCC guidelines. In other words, the reports need to be critically assessed by authors. There needs to be a copy available. So if, for example, a reviewer wanted to see that copy, that they could be sent it. If it's not in English, then a summary or abstract in English, and contact details regarding who to speak to for more information. We're working to quite tight timelines to be included in the first order draft. Any papers or reports have to be in submission by October 2018, and to be included in the second order draft, they need to be accepted by May 2019. But if you'll remember back to the beginning of my talk, I mentioned we also have the AR6 main assessment report coming out, and there is opportunity to update on new information that's come out since the special reports back in the main assessment report. And just to finish off, there are two other special reports coming out. So we've already heard a little bit about the special report on global warming of 1.5. These are the 5 chapters that will form that report. Maybe a particular relevance is the impacts of 1.5 degrees and higher levels of warming on natural and human systems. Chapter 2 will be thinking about mitigation pathways. So for example, overshoot and then drop back down to 1.5 versus more of a sort of consistent trajectory approach, and the implications for the Sustainable Development Goals. The lead author teams have already been nominated, engaged for this special report, and the first order expert review draft starts on the 31st of July 2017, so in a couple of months' time. The second report is Climate Change and Land, and that has the 7 chapters that I put up here, and this is on a timescale that's more complementary to the Oceans and Cryosphere report. And I'm going to finish there. If you need any more information, please either email myself or the TSU. And I've also put up the Oceans and Cryosphere special report website as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I always forget to put this on, but now it's on. Thank you very much, Elvira. I think we have room even here for some questions before going on. Anyone who has a more specific question to Elvira? No, I don't think that is the case, but hang around. We will have a final session then on question and answers. So now I would like to give the floor instead to the chief negotiator on Finland, Mrs. Outi Hunkatukia, and she will speak on the climate outcomes from the Fairbanks Ministerial, but focusing on the Finnish chairmanship and its Finnish chairmanship's program. for the coming 2 years. So Finland is actually the incoming chair of the Arctic Council after the Ministerial in Fairbanks. So please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. I have a few slides just to go through the Finnish chairmanship's program and priorities, and then I have a few slides on the Fairbanks Declaration. I mean, the bits on the climate change. I thought I'd go through those. And the title of our program is Exploring Common Solutions, and we have 4 priorities, and we took over the chairmanship now at the Fairbanks Ministerial after the US. So I think perhaps, since we've been preparing the program, I think for quite some time. So I think there've been quite a few changes in the geopolitical context. But they haven't actually. We haven't changed our priorities. So we have 4 priorities during the chairmanship. The first one is on environmental protection. Second one is connectivity. Third one is meteorological cooperation, and the 4th one is education. So just to highlight what we have under each of these. So on the environmental protection, it's there are basically 3 focus areas. The first one is on biodiversity conservation. Second one on pollution prevention, and then the third one is climate change, and that covers them both, mitigation and adaptation. Also on the environmental protection, I think this actually links to the presentations that we just had. We're really trying to then encourage to put the Arctic Council's recommendations into practice, and also to communicate the results of Arctic cooperation in global forums, such as this one. There's also we're also proposing to intensify the exchange of information on best practices and emerging technologies to promote sustainable development. So it's quite a sort of broad agenda on the environmental protection. On connectivity, this is really sort of related to telecommunications and to exploring ways to enhance connectivity and availability of broadband services in the Arctic. I'm not going to dwell on that because that's perhaps less, sort of more outside the focus of this event here. But obviously taking into account the needs of the indigenous peoples, local communities and businesses, and tourism and researchers. Also here, sort of building on the recommendations of the task force on telecommunications infrastructure in the Arctic, and as well as the Arctic Economic Council. On the meteorological front, the aim is to develop and deepen the cooperation both on meteorological and oceanographic areas, and to intensify monitoring, and this covers then land, sea, atmosphere, and the space. And this would then provide better data coverage and fill the geographical gaps in data collection, because we do realize that there are quite a few of those. This, in the medium to longer term, this would then lead to better services and forecasting of meteorological phenomena in the Arctic, and contribute also to making ultimately the climate change scenarios more accurate, or make them as accurate as possible. Third area then is the next one is on this is the final one, actually. There are four of them. So education is the 4th one, and here the aim is to support fair educational opportunities in remote areas. And this is obviously key for creating sustainable development and build resilience in Arctic communities. We recognize that it's really the qualified teachers that are the key for providing basic education. And the aim is to strengthen the network of education specialists in cooperation with the University of the Arctic. Here also developing modern methods such as digitalization of education. That's going to be the core of it. Now, a few words on the general framework and how Finland is approaching the chairmanship and how we intend to work. It's a inclusive cooperation and exploring common solutions to common challenges. I mean, this is really the point of departure for the chairmanship, and the chairmanship is indeed, it's handled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's the Foreign Affairs ministers that meet and and so on. The Arctic Council member states and the permanent participants representing the indigenous peoples, I mean, they are really committed to environmental protection and sustainable development of the Arctic. Again, here we do recognize the geopolitical context and see, well, we will see how that how the program then shapes up. But I mean, all the member states, they have indeed pledged to maintain the Arctic as a region of peace, stability, and constructive cooperation. And from what I understand, that even after even given the relations with Russia after Crimea and so on, I mean, it hasn't really had an impact on, at least on the technical work in the Arctic Council. Now, on climate change and sustainable development, these indeed form a broad framework for the program, and here we stress the need to continue working to mitigate climate change and to strengthen resilience and adaptation, and also to raise awareness of Arctic issues in global climate talks such as this one. So it's good that. Good that you all are here. Sustainable development is really at the core of the Arctic Council mandate, and we also propose to explore how the Agenda 2030 framework can be used in Arctic cooperation for the benefit of humans and nature. We are keen to engage observers in the work of the Arctic Council, and we see their value and their sort of for the work and for its international role. At the same time, we do recognize the limitations because that some of the members of the Arctic Council may see on the involvement of observers. Finland intends to continue the practice of special observer sessions as part of the senior Arctic officers meeting, and also the Council continues to build on this mutually beneficial cooperation with entities such as the Arctic Economic Council, Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and the Arctic Offshore Regulators Forum, and the University of the Arctic. We are also looking for setting a long-term strategic planning and goals for the Council, and considering the possibility of having an Arctic summit under the chairmanship. But obviously, convening such a summit, I mean, it would indeed require the favorable condition. I mean, you need to have something that the leaders can agree to, and it kind of depends also on the international, on the geopolitical context. So that, and also it depends on identifying an appropriate agenda. Now, a few words on the Fairbanks Declaration. So I'm sure quite a few, you've seen the media reports, you've seen the some articles on the discussions around the declaration. I mean, I can assure you that there was quite a bit of sort of going back and forth on the different wordings of the declaration, and also having followed the discussions on declarations where there would be a mention of the Paris Agreement that we've had earlier this year in the context of the G7 and so on. So, I mean, our assessment is that indeed the wording that we got in the Fairbanks Declaration actually isn't a bad one, because first of all, we got very clearly a statement on supporting the scientific findings. And on the warming of the Arctic at twice the rate of global average, and so on. And also we got a mention of noting the entry into force of the Paris Agreement, but also on its implementation, and the reiteration of the need for a global action to reduce greenhouse gas, long-lived greenhouse gases, and also these short-lived climate pollutants. So our assessment is that this is actually not a bad one. This is my final slide now. So just to have a few of the paragraphs where basically the issues that I just mentioned are being fleshed out in somewhat more detail. I mean, we are very enthusiastic about our chairmanship in the Arctic Council, and we do hope that we will be able to showcase more of the scientific work, and we do value of the to bring it to the broader audience, that it's not just an Arctic issue, it's actually a global issue, because when you look at the impacts of the warming up of the Arctic, like Svante was saying earlier, I mean, you feel you feel the impacts in New York and Florida. It's not just in Greenland. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ute. I made the reflection myself that we are unusually well on time, and I hope you didn't take me seriously when I said that we were going to speak at double speed. But you have managed better than at any other occasion I think I've been to. But I hope you feel that you have got your messages through. So please, we have time for questions, also direct question to at this time. Yes, please. I don't know where the box is situated right now. There, could you throw it over to the lady who was coming there? That was a very good pitch. So, okay.
Thank you. I have a few questions which may reach to different speakers.
Actually, we are not at the final discussion yet. I should have actually said that. But you are welcome to sit here because I'm also going to give a presentation.
Then I can wait if that was
if I hadn't, then we would had actually a lot of time. I think we would have started or finished earlier. No, I thought direct question to at this time. But if you have questions, you are welcome to come back then. If there are no specific questions, then I think I would like to take the floor myself. And I get some help from Heidi here that will put on my presentation. You might be more comfortable sitting in the front row than having the lights right in the... Yeah, exactly. While we are putting it on, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is, as you heard, Svante Bodin. I am within the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative. I am a Eurasian director, meaning that I work mostly on this half of the world, not the other one. But my background is really, I spent 20 years with the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute, at the end being head of the meteorological services in Sweden. And for the next 20 years, I was with the Ministry of Environment, most of the time as director of the Division for Climate Change. So I've spent most of my life with climate change and associated problem, as a matter of fact. So at this time, I would like to then come back to what I mentioned before, actually, to see how what we have heard and some additional information here will impact the negotiations within the UNFCCC, particularly to go for more stringent mitigation commitments in the near term. Let's start with a very quick overview here. Observing continuing changes in the Arctic and cryosphere. Some of this, of course, has been penetrated in some more detail by Lars-Otto Reiersen's presentation, but I think that some of the messages could benefit from actually getting even a higher weight. Arctic and all cryosphere, actually, Antarctic and alpine regions warming up to 3 times the global mean. A 2 degrees world is actually a 5 degrees Arctic, and even more, as we have heard, as temperature rises. There's a it's continuing at rapid pace and consistently. So there is no pause, actually. There's no hiatus that in the Arctic that was discussed for the global temperature some years ago. And it takes place from tropical glaciers to the pole, and the extremely shockingly high, as we also have heard in the Arctic the last winter, but also the winter before that. Most importantly then, that what's happening in the Arctic will and is affecting some basic fundamentals of the climate system, some pillars. And I think it will reduce albedo, and that is the big refrigerator reflecting solar radiation to outer space again. And albedo from lost sea ice, land ice, and snow cover, warming, unstable meridian weather patterns, etc., as a consequence of direct consequence of that. Great ice sheets and mountain glaciers are affected, sea level rise, changes in ocean currents, for example, and permafrost and coastal seabed thawing, carbon release, both as CO2 and methane. And if you look at it, current indices will cross many of these thresholds. And this is just an illustration how dramatic the additional warming in the polar regions are, And as you see, there is actually quite a strong warming in the Antarctic now, but starting from much lower temperature. So the spectrum of irreversibility, you could say, or why 0.5 degrees avoided going from 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees makes a difference. Arctic's sea ice snow cover more than 50% decrease now at 1 degree only, but sea ice-free summers norm probably around 1.5 degrees, coming then within the next 20 years. Mountain glaciers, tropical low and mid latitudes almost lost, most lost at 1.5 degrees. Well, I will show some slides on that later. Great ice sheets, the Greenland ice sheet, we have heard about that, but also the West Antarctic ice sheet will be lost essentially around 1.6 to 1.8 degrees. And that is because of fairly recently discovered instabilities of the glacial systems in the Antarctica. And that we could give 50 meters of additional sea level rise, well, over 5,000 years. But if you look at it, 1.5 meters within the next 8 years. So that is fairly dramatic, one must say, and this has not been taken into account in the general extrapolations of expected sea level rise. We are still on the side where we can affect that. But also complete polar deglaciation around 6 degrees. That will take a long time if you look at the Antarctica. But what's interesting is that it will take an extremely long time to re-establish a climate regime that have glaciated polar areas. Southern Arctic ocean acidification, it takes a very long time to get back and buffer what you have lost. And finally, permafrost thaw, it's immediate, irreversible carbon release to the atmosphere. I cannot put it back again until over millions of years. So that is what we have to look at. We have summarized that in a report that came out for the Paris meeting of cryosphere thresholds. And in this picture, you can see where the different irreversible or almost irreversible processes kick in. And there is a temperature bar at the bottom, as you see, going from today's temperature. When we wrote that, that was 0.8 degrees. Last year, it was 1.1 degrees. So reality really supersedes science and observations here. So it's a very quick process. More interestingly then is what happens in the strip called the INDC range in 2100. Nowadays the NDCs. And you can see that most of those irreversible processes are already started, and some of them cannot be stopped. You can delay them and slow them down. But if you go up to where we are, then in the business as usual scenarios, then practically all of the cryosphere will be gone in due time. If you look a little more specifically what's happening, Lars-Otto has already covered Arctic sea ice extent. This is just a reminder that it goes on like this. What we have expected is still extremely low ice extent in the Arctic. This is the beginning of May. And it is well below than the 2012 summer minimum that once established the record, but that has been superseded. So it's out of any previous ranges. It's also interesting to note that at the same time there is record low ice also in the Antarctic. There, of course, it's started the re-icing process, but it's much less than it's been before. Many of the predictions actually what's going to happen with the sea ice comes from this simple relationship noted and demonstrated by Knotts and Strover last year. There is a linear relationship between cumulative carbon dioxide emissions and sea ice area in September, the minimum month. And the trend is 3 square meters of sea ice per ton of CO2. So that is something you can take with you when you fly or when you drive or whatever you do, that it's immediately then translatable into sea ice loss. This also goes for the mountain glaciers. This is a picture that displays what's happening in various regions of the world: Central Asia, Central Europe, low latitudes, Southern Andes. And the right axis here, the vertical axis, shows percentage of glacial ice, or rather, mountain glacier ice left when time goes on and temperature increase. And for the RCP 8.5, which translates into 4.5 degrees at 2100, then you see that in all places, all glaciers are lost practically. In the best case, that is the RCP 1.6, still a majority of glaciers are lost. There is a little recovery actually in Central Europe if you can stabilize, and carbon dioxide and temperature in under the RCP 2.6, which is roughly similar to the 1.5 scenario. But there is a very little chance that that will recover. I've also mentioned what's happening in the Antarctic. Antarctica was regarded as the sleeping giant for many years. It was so cold that even if there was global warming, there was no chance that things could change in the Antarctic. If it is minus 40 degrees, even plus 10 degrees really doesn't count. And there is no melting on the surface in Antarctica, but what people did not actually took into account in the beginning was the role of the surrounding sea. And there have been processes put in action then, first in the West Antarctic ice sheet. Several of the glaciers there have turned out to be unstable and started the process of emptying themselves in the surrounding sea. And that goes, for example, for the Amundsen Basin, but also the Thwaites Basin. If those basins will then disappear and melt and move out into the sea, that will give in itself a 1 meter additional meter. Now I said if, that's the wrong word. The right word is when that happens. It's also a process that may take several hundred years, but once started, it's not possible to stop it. But I think people are also extremely concerned about what's happening in the East Antarctica, because there is an even huger mass of ice. And some of the basins in East Antarctica seems very close to also become unstable, but by a slightly different process. And if that happens, that will itself give rise to 3 to 4 meters of additional sea level rise. Also, of course, over a time period of several hundred years up to 1,000 years. But also once started, impossible to stop and reverse, only possible to slow down. But we have touched upon it before. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. Cryosphere force changes are already upon us, affecting economies, health, and well-being. Damages are especially large for the poorest populations. Sea level rise, extreme weather events, water shortage, floodings, all happens affecting poor population. This is, of course, because of the remote impacts of what's happening in the cryosphere, but also what's happening locally. But one must realize and think of that many of the really dense population regions in the world are very close to cryosphere regions, like South Asia, for example, in the Himalayas. That's immediately affected by what's happening with the glaciers in the Himalayas. So there is an urgent need to limit all additional temperature rise only because of this. But what do we have to do then? I mean, this message of taking early action, that is strongly reinforced by what you see then happening in the cryosphere. And in order to do that, and something which we have known for some time, it is necessary to stay to peak emissions of carbon dioxide before 2020 in order to make it possible to achieve a 2.5 degrees goal. So there are other aspects of this also linking the Arctic to the cryosphere climate change and the sustainable development goals. There is a need to reduce cryosphere climate change in the near term, not just the long term. And that is partly connected with a need to reduce the burden of air pollution, which is possible to reduce in the short term. There is a need to feed a growing population, which is affected by the environment. And here enters another factor into the discussion that gives some hope for making it meaningful to address the rapid changes in the cryosphere. Emissions of black carbon and methane addresses all of these needs. Those are called short-lived climate pollutants, and those who were here during the previous side event got a fairly thorough documentation of what it means to work and reducing short-lived climate pollutants. They are short-lived, meaning that what you do to them will have a climate impact and a health impact and a food security impact immediately, practically. But if you do it over a period of 20 years, well, you will have the impact over 20 to 30 years. It can be shown, actually, that was the start for the growing and huge interest now in short-lived climate pollutant actions, that doing it rightly and taking on and reducing short-lived climate pollutants by implementing 16 fairly well-known measures on reducing black carbon and methane, you can avoid half a degree of expected global temperature rise by 2050. And Lars-Otto has already pointed out that that is magnified when it comes to the Arctic. This is from the original calculations connected to those 0.5 degrees. Here it's shown that up to 2050, 2070, it's possible to avoid 0.7 degrees of Arctic warming over that period of time. But more interestingly, what is it you have to do? What is it that affects the Arctic in terms of short-lived climate pollutants? What are the sources? This picture is from an analysis made a couple of years ago. What actually affects the Arctic in terms of emissions from various sectors? It turns out that those who have the biggest impact if you reduce emissions from those sectors are emissions from stoves, household heating and household cooking. They two together, they amount for the highest potential in reducing black carbon. But if you look furthest to the right, it's also open burning of agricultural residues. Here you are coming to sources that are usually not covered by climate mitigation actions when reducing carbon dioxide. So this is a new area, new opportunities, but it also, all actions here do have multiple benefits. It's a little funny because if I had known that there was this huge stove or open fire here in this room, that I sometimes think they must have secretly put it on before we came here, then I would have had a slide instead illustrating what could be gained from taking action on biomass and wood stoves. But here, this slide deals with what you can get from in terms of benefits from open burning of agricultural residues. One must realize that burning rapidly, which is common in many places of the world, including in Russia, Ukraine, South Asia, and even in Europe, actually, even if we have tried to stop that behavior. Burning rapidly decreases soil quality and crop yields. No burn alternatives have higher yields, and that is, for example, conservation agriculture, direct seeding, cover crops. No burn alternatives aid soil retention, decrease need for fertilizer, etc. So taking action on that has many additional benefits to also reducing warming in the near term. This is another picture that takes the global perspective and puts action on short-lived climate pollutants in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. What it says is that early action on short-lived climate pollutants, yeah, that will help. You will get that half a degree of avoided warming, but will not solve the problem with going out of range of what's needed to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Instead, you have to take a combined action, early action on both long-lived greenhouse gases and short-lived climate pollutants, really to stay on target. But then it is feasible doing that if you do both. And one must keep in mind also that you will have tremendous benefits in the field of global health or local health. In fact, the two major factors, the two major burdens of disease. On fourth place, you have household air pollution from solid fuel. That's the stoves, and another one is the ambient particulate matter pollution. That's the PM2.5, basically black carbon. So I've come to my end. Unfortunately, you were so generous with my time, so I think I've used up all the time that you left me. But I hope you can have some that you can forgive me for that. But we are coming to the end here. So if you directly sum up this in relation to the 2008 stock taking and its implication for the period 2020 to 2030, once in motion, reversing most cryosphere dynamics is nearly impossible. A return to pre-industrial will neither halt nor reverse them. Pathway does make a difference. An overshot scenario will not help. You will still trigger these and pass those thresholds and trigger those irreversible processes. Only way to prevent these conditions is never to reach these temperatures that we're speaking about 1.5, or if that's not possible, above 2 degrees. So we have to accelerate all possible mitigation means and measure CO2 and SLCP quickly and decisively. That is a stark choice for the 2018 stocktaking: Arctic preserving mitigation or extreme adaptation and geoengineering. And I cannot refrain from quoting an old friend of mine who was co-chair of the IPCC before, Jean-Pascal van Uppersele, Belgium. There is no compromising with the freezing temperature of water. So that is what I wanted to say. Thank you. Now I would like to invite all speakers up to the podium here, or lack of podium, to the desks here. Yes. While we are gathering together here, I would like to, as part of this first section of the side event, show a video that I think is very interesting. At the Arctic Council meeting in Fairbanks, the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs made a presentation or intervention where she clearly lined out what had to be done and what climate leadership would mean in the future. So we are playing it. It's only 3 minutes, and before that we go into the question and answer session. So please.
Arctic friends, thank you for bringing us back to Alaska. I come from the north of Sweden, where you're supposed to be modest, so we call this unnecessarily beautiful. And I would like to first of all thank Secretary Tillerson and also the host committee for the warm hospitality, and also congratulate you on your successful chairmanship. We are 8 ministers of foreign affairs around this table, and we know that there are so many parts of the world that are marred with violence and conflicts. And in this situation, the Arctic is, as you heard my dear Norwegian colleagues say, the Arctic is characterized by peace, stability, low tension, and cooperation based on respect for international law. So let's keep it that way. But the Arctic is today also about challenges, as we've heard around this table from all of you. And I wonder about what the planet would say if she had a seat at the table. Perhaps she would remind us how the Arctic functions as our cooling system. Perhaps she would admit as being as concerned as the scientific community, as worried as the local and indigenous communities who live on the life support system that it offers. And this deep concern might stem from the fact that things are changing so fast now. Only 2 decades from now, the Arctic Ocean could be largely free of sea ice. Perhaps our planet would say, I've been your best friend since the Industrial Revolution. I've done everything I can to dampen and absorb. I've tried to keep Greenland and the permafrost in Siberia intact, and I have sent you no invoices. But it is about to change. Perhaps our planet would quote our own reports. Arctic warming could have a cumulative net cost of $90 trillion at the end of this century. So, dear friends, the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement provide a science-based path away from these risks and towards equality and sustainability. Like no other generation before us, we have the knowledge, technology, the money, and the capacity to save our planet. It's a win-win, as the business community already knows. Investment in green solutions creates new jobs. Sustainability has become a business case. And in the longer term, the low carbon growth story is the only growth story on offer. And I think we can serve as an example, the Swedish example. Since 1990, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 23%. And meanwhile, our GDP has grown by 58%. And my government has set the next target. Sweden will be carbon neutral by 2045. Our common goal around this table and in the Arctic Council requires a joint priority, political will, and process of new scientific research, business innovation, and many determined steps towards a sustainable future. Timo, the Arctic Council, we think, will be in safe hands with Finland as chair. And you know that if we want a sustainable future, we need a stable Arctic. And with my grandchildren in mind, I would say, let's go for it. Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. She was Sweden's first commissioner in the European Union when Sweden joined in 1994. And she had the environment portfolio. So she has a specific commitment, of course, to this. But nevertheless, in that spirit, I think we should open up for questions to the panel. I think I can stand here. I think I will not answer many of them. It will be you who will be doing that. So please, now you have your chance.
Hello, I just have a few brief questions that will spread across. My name is Lindsay Cook with the Quaker UN office. We are observers of the IPCC and the UNFCCC and have worked very hard to help communicate the science. First, I want to thank you that the findings of the 1.5 to 2 degrees changes will be in the upcoming IPCC 1.5 report. That's incredibly important to hear. I wanted to ask if you could confirm if the methane release from permafrost will be better included in the upcoming IPCC reports. We understood it was less so in the AR5. Also, we want to know if any of you are aware of a very simple booklet for the average person, which reflects the urgency of the situation, referring back to the climate science. Very simple booklet that we can hand out to the average person to understand the urgency, because that's part of the action. And then finally, for our colleague from the Working Group 2, will the AR6 or any of your work be including the climate silence work that we've heard about? Nadine Andrews gave a presentation to with the IPCC to high-level faith groups in London, and it was fascinating. Thank you.
I think that many of the questions concerns IPCC's coming report, so you, Elvira, start, and then we can reflect on this pamphlet that is obviously so badly needed. So please, Elvira.
Thank you. So probably not answering these in order, but concerning methane and permafrost, that's certainly something that was discussed at length in the scoping meeting for Oceans and Cryosphere. So hopefully the latest knowledge will be assessed within that report. If not, then there's opportunities for AR6. Simple booklet. So at the moment, we're actually having a lot of discussions around some of our communication products, and and the sort of information that IPCC can produce. I don't know what form this will take, but it's likely that there will be informative videos and fact sheets that can be used. And I'd also say that I know a lot of them are very scientific, but all the images and figures that are in the IPCC reports will be available for people to freely use in their outreach materials as well. Nadine is a very good colleague of mine, so I'm aware of the work that she's been the presentation that she gave on climate silence. At the moment, it's difficult to say how much this will be picked up in some of the assessment reports. I mean, certainly for the 6th assessment, we've made an effort to reach out to the psychology community to be more involved in the discourse, and as well as yourselves, you're the Quakers, yeah, coming on as observer organisations. We also have a couple of the psychology associations on there. So there's, as we're moving towards solutions, these are some of the challenges, I guess, that need to be picked up in the discourse. But it's difficult for me to say right now exactly how or where they will be covered. So.
Okay, Lars-Otto, I think you also wanted to respond.
I can just add that from the Arctic, we released 2 years ago a special assessment on the methane in the Arctic. So if you're interested, you have a good scientific documentation on what we see is going on there, and one on black carbon. So they are available. They are the most updated one. The communication, the outreach is a challenge. The pamphlet I had here is so-called written by a science writer, but it's far too complicated for ordinary people. It's for educated people. We have seen that over the 20 years we tried to communicate. We have one pamphlet made in Denmark, Arctic, a hot topic. It's written for teenager, and based on the feedback from the schools in Denmark, that nearly hit what it should. Maybe it hit those who came out of the gymnasium, but still we have a challenge to really come down in a simple communication here. We try by videos, but it's too complicated. So we really need help here to get it done.
Yeah, that is a communication challenge, basically. We have everything we need to produce such a one from scientific point of view, but doing it, communicate it. So, are you happy with that? Okay, some other questions? Well, this is the only time you have to ask questions about what's really going on in the Arctic. Okay. I interpret your silence that you have got to know everything that you want to know, and that you will leave here. Yeah, I saw that. So I will not break, and that's very good. It was right there, wasn't it? Yes. Can you through it? Or do you want to?
Who was asking the question?
Who was it?
I have another one, but please, somebody else.
I thought it was you actually. Yeah. So please go ahead.
Well, just being very aware of this extremely sobering message that you're giving on the Arctic, what is the response you're finding from the negotiation community?
Yes, Udi.
Okay, maybe just to, I mean, I think on the scientific information and sort of the research reports and so on the Arctic, I mean, sort of the expectation is that those will then be picked up by the IPCC work and then fed to the global negotiations community. I think the first opportunity is going to be in 2018, next year, where we have the facilitative dialogue, and we're very much waiting for the 1.5 degrees report. At the same time, I mean, we are sort of like I think Svante was also referring to the communications challenge. So I mean, if you start talking about Arctic issues, they often see those as, you know, like a regional issue, whereas it is a truly global one. And I think that's perhaps one of the communication challenges, and maybe that's one of the areas where I think we can do more on the messaging on the Arctic to make, you know, just to highlight the point that the warming up of the Arctic is not just you know, an Arctic issue; it's a global one.
Lars-Otto, please.
Just to add that we have delivered the SWEPA report a week ago. But we will have in 4 weeks' time, we have a workshop in Oslo where we will discuss our contributions to the IPCC report on ocean and cryosphere. So we have called in some of the lead authors and extra authors to see what can we do in the next year to update this so the IPCC really get the latest news from the Arctic, and especially on these interactions. That's something we really need to understand better, the interactions, how the feedbacks are going on here.
May I add a little to that from my experience as from the Swedish Minister of the Environment and being in climate change for so many years. I think there is a need to sort of step over the negotiators sometimes and go to the political level and directly inform ministers and others and parliamentarians what's going on. And I think there are two things in the Arctic that they usually don't know about. And Ute, you mentioned one, the global aspects. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It affects the whole world, the whole globe, everywhere. And the other one is this with the irreversible processes. I mean, from many points of view, climate change itself, speaking about carbon dioxide, is almost irreversible, at least over a time span of several hundred years. But when you go to the Arctic and Antarctic processes, some of them are irreversible over time frames of 10,000 years. And so what you actually set in motion then will not go away, whatever you do. And that, I think, is also a lack of communication about that specific fact. So it's good also to bridge and go directly to politicians with some of these important messages to see what the reaction will be then. Well, that triggered some further questions, please.
Hello, yeah, I'm from Norway, and I was wondering if you have any suggestions to what we can do as the social society to directly affect the politicians. And also I have a much more personal question. I was wondering if there is any possibilities for master thesis or something like this for one of your projects.
I don't know. Should we take the first question first, and then we wait with the masterpieces? Yeah, you have heard the question. Do you have any response to that? What could actually people do?
Okay, on the role of civil society and what you can do. I mean, I do think that the younger community, I think that's very, very important in the negotiations, and I do think that's a very useful message to just hammer home. Basically, is that, you know, I mean, in the end of the day, you know, we may not see what happens to the Arctic, but then, you know, this next generation that will see and will have to deal with the devastating consequences. So I do think sort of getting more focus on this intergenerational aspects and really sort of highlighting the fact that while it's us, you know, sort of our generation making the decisions, it is indeed the next generations that will have to deal with the consequences. So I think that's a sort of the whole intergenerational equity and that aspect. I think is but again, I mean, we come back to the same communications challenge. I mean, it's you know, it's the technical reports. It's I mean, I know Svante is doing a great job with all the graphs, but it's still, you know, you do it does require a certain level of sophistication and education to be able to pick the message from the graphs.
Anyone else who would like to comment on this?
I think you need strong reactions from the ordinary people, the voters. We have been communicating to decision makers, and that's been the wrong group. We should have communicated to those who vote the politicians and told them the simple message, so they have elected the politicians who could take the right actions. So that's one thing you have to do. The other thing is that the industry leaders, they may take actions because they see what's coming up and they can see the profit here. We've seen some interesting effects of taking CEOs, industrial leaders, to Greenland and let them experience what's going on there. And based after a 10 days trip with the hunters and the indigenous people, they go back with a new view. They have seen what's going on. And then we see interesting actions taken by them in the way they are investing for the future. So there are ways around conservative politicians who don't believe in climate change, man-made.
Thank you very much. That is almost like a final statement. And I couldn't agree more, actually, because myself went from government to civil society, NGO, and this is exactly what we are doing. Of course, you are a selected audience, you can understand this, but if you want to go otherwise, you have, of course, to frame it and pick up that communication challenge to do that. But I think that also informing what you say, other parts of civil society might be as important for the future. Those who are not here representing civil society, those are also people and organizations we should reach out to, like CEOs. If there are no further questions, well, I'm saying it more rhetorically, I think. I'm going to break anyway, even if there was another question. I would like to thank you, Lars-Otto, Ute, and Elvira. I would like to thank you for enduring this stove-like climate here. And thank you all.